Good evening, dear listener, and welcome to another episode of Mortica Presents FREDtime Stories. On this show, I will be reading short horror stories from both up-and-coming authors and horror legends alike. In case you didn't know, I am your host, Dead Fred, and I am the voice of the horror-inspired rock band Mortica. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and leaving a like and a comment. If you want to know more about Mortica, please follow us on all of our social media sites. If you want to support the show and the band, please consider joining our Patreon page. For just $5 a month, you could have access to behind the screams footage, early access to merch and music, as well as a monthly live stream from yours truly. Now, without further ado, let's get into tonight's reading. Tonight's reading comes to us from horror legend and personal favorite, Edgar Allan Poe. This story is entitled, The Cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definiteness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with immunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my good will. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected or even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship of wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adapted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Australian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, and he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the comical Captain Bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I would never stop wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear friend, Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the Carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without first consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado? I have my doubts." "Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has critical turn, it is he. He will tell me Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools would have it that his tastes match your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceived you have an engagement. Lucchesi, I have no engagement. Come. My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp and encrusted with nitre. Let us go nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado. You have been opposed upon, sir. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelier close to my person. I suffered me to hurry to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them not to return until morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well know, to ensure their immediate disappearance once and for all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archways that led to the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe?" said he. "It is further on," said I, "but observe the white web-work which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the requiem of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere nothing. A cough will not kill me. I shall not die from a cough." "This is true," I replied. "And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. Here, a draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off a neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a jeer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, and, with his bells jingled, "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us." "And I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune licessit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. He had passed through the walls of piled bones, with casks and puncheons intermittently, into the utmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the riverbed. The drops of moisture trickle amongst the bones. Come, we will go back, ere it is too late. Your cough—" "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on. But first, another draught of the Medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath my cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, into descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than to flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vaults overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides from this interior crypt were still ornated in this manner. From the 4th the bones had been thrown down, and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed at displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It deemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting a dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination that feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi, he is an ignoramus, interrupted my friend, as stepping unsteadily forward, which I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of those deepened short chain, and the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but a work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too astounded to resist. Withdrawing a key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You can't help feel the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power. The Amontillado, ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself throwing the pile of bones, which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had, in great measure, worn off. The earliest indication I had was that the low moaning cry from the depths of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. Then there was a long and obstinate silence. I laid the 2nd tier, the 3rd, the 4th, and then I heard furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which I might hearken, it was more satisfaction. I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished, without interruption, the 5th, 6th, and 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon the level of my breast. I again paused, and, holding the flambeau over the masonry work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of low, and shrill screams bursted suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to be thrusting me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it upon the recess, but the thought instantly reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, 9th, the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its designated position, but now there came from the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Yeah, a very good joke indeed, and it's an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo, over wine." "Amontillado," I said. Yes, the Amontillado. But it is getting late. Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato, and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said. "Let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor." "Yes," I said. "For the love of God." But these words were hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato." No answer. I called again, "Fortunato." No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in reply only a jingle of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end to my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up against the new masonry, and I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For half a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace, requiescat. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's reading, and hope you'll stop by again. My name has been Dead Fred, and until next time, dear mortal, stay scared.